All right, folks. So episode number 4, Take Care with Josh Covette. We have Ash Merchant with us, and we just had a wonderful yakitori binchotan meal. Yeah, which it was a success, right? Pretty
delicious.
Cool stuff. Yeah.
10 out of 10.
I'm going to get your comments on it, but before we do, I have to tell our kind of meet cute, because this is like a very rare situation where I reached out to Facebook world and I said, hey, who should I interview next? And I think people are starting to figure out the kind of person that I want to interview. So someone who is doing big things in business, someone who takes really good care of themselves and their psyche, like resilient individuals, people that are working on some sort of higher calling, basically. And then people that work with the underserved. And Dan Glaze, who needs to get his butt on this podcast in the first place, right? Dan Glaze says, hey, you need to interview Ash Merchant. And whatever Dan Glaze says, I believe, because he's the greatest person on the planet, pretty much, right? Yes. I think he won an award for that, greatest person on the planet. Anyway, so then I look up Ash, and I see that you're connected with Laura Covette and Steve Covette on LinkedIn, which is hysterical because those are my parents. And I call and I'm like, hey, how do you know Laura and Steve Covette? And so what's the story for how you know them?
So Laura, your mom and I worked together at the first company I worked for outside of school was where I met Laura.
Yeah.
And we spent 10 years together then working together, and she was my boss for a period and just one of my favorite people.
Small world.
So,
such a small world.
Yeah, it was. And it was funny when we reached out. I said, I know 2 Covettes in the world, and I'm about to know a third, and I bet you they're all connected.
have to be, right? They absolutely have to be. For those in podcasting world that don't know this, Dan Glaze is the money manager for all of the Movement Foundation money. And he works for NCF, and he's an amazing individual and a really sharp guy. And you're a client of his, clearly. Indeed. That's how y'all know each other, right? Yeah,
he's one of my favorite people on the planet.
Oh, I love. Yeah, I feel the same way about him. I think everyone who's ever met him feels that way about him. Okay, so fast forward. I reach out. We have a little initial interview, and I ask you the question I ask everybody, which is, what do you do to take care of yourself? And you said a new one that I hadn't heard yet. And you said, I like to grill.
I do. I like to cook.
Grill, yeah.
Whether it's grill or whether it's cooking indoors. And then we just meandered into a very interesting conversation after that.
Exactly. Yeah. It's one of those where I wanted to stop the conversation because I wanted it on camera, and I was worried we were going to leave some parts out for this, obviously. But we decided, I'm trying to figure out which camera, that one, I'm looking in that camera. We decided to have a unique grilling experience, and we ordered a big bag of binchotan charcoal. You have to look it up. This is the highest end charcoal in the entire world.
Yes.
Out of Japan, out of one forest in Japan, with this unique process, and it comes out really hard, looking like bones, and it's supposed to be the hottest and the tastiest and the best charcoal. We bought a bag this big for $150 and wanted to check it out and see if it was like worth all the fuss. And what were your thoughts on it?
I would say it was absolutely worth it. We feasted on chicken and salmon and vegetables and pork belly and just a really tasty, and some wagyu beef as well.
The wagyu beef, and it wasn't the it was A5 or A6? A5? A5? Yeah, I think it's A5. No, so. It was the ground wagyu beef, but it was delicious. It was a very high end hamburger, and it was delicious. The charcoal, it gets so hot, but it smokes instead of flaming when the fat hits it, which I think adds to the flavor a little bit. And then you also have to buy this special little unique grill for it. So for those that want to try this out, I'll put some B-roll on so you can check it out. Anyway.
I tell you what I loved about it, though, is it allowed you and I to spend a good amount of time just getting to know one another and understanding about our stories and understanding about our backgrounds. And, normally, you and I could have met for dinner right down the street over here, and it wouldn't have been nearly as engaging and certainly personable.
Well, and like there's something a little primal about it. How long have men been standing over fire, cooking meat, and having a chat with one another and getting to know each other?
That's right.
Yeah. So it's I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that a lot. That was a nice little treat. A lot of times, instead of doing that, we do a workout.
Yeah.
And the workouts are usually so hard that I can't talk during any of it. So I don't get to know the person because I'm panting on the ground. One guy took me jogging. One guy did CrossFit. Like, it's like, that was nice. That was my style out there. You know, I had a cocktail. You had a chilled Coke Zero. So yeah, that was, we might have to rethink the way I do podcasts. Anyway, so give me like a brief introduction and history on Ash Merchant.
Sure. Ash Merchant. I've been in Atlanta for 42 plus years now, and I married a native, and there's not that many of them left that were born and raised in Atlanta, but my wife was, and her family was as well, and delighted to call Atlanta home.
Yeah.
Grew up in upstate New York. As I shared with you over dinner, I'm a first-generation American, so my parents immigrated from India back in the 60s, and we just grew up in upstate New York and then came down to Atlanta when I was 10 and have been in Atlanta ever since. Went to Georgia for my undergrad and go Dogs. And
Walton, Georgia?
Walton High School. Still
It's the first time anyone from Walton's ever gone to Georgia.
And then did my MBA at Emory. So I've been an Atlanta boy the whole time.
Local, yeah. So we try to keep it short because people have very short attention spans right now. But there's two parts I want to key in on with you from our chats.
Sure.
Okay. The first part is, first of all, if my wife hears this story, it's over for me. Okay. So flourishing career, like knocking the socks off of it in the corporate world, and then all of a sudden you decide to go on sabbatical and take the family on an RV trip across the country for a year.
Yes, 1 year.
1 year. One whole year. And I got to say, that equally entices me and freaks me out. Right? We've been climbing and climbing and climbing, and then we just say, okay, I'm going to put it all on hold, and I'm going to go and spend a year. So how did this come to be? What's the story?
Yeah, so it's a great story because everybody always assumes it was my idea. And the truth is, it was my wife's idea, and she had approached me in 2015. I had just switched over to a new job in the company that I had been working for. I'd gotten promoted and was looking to do some just larger things in the organization. So this assignment was going to be pivotal for that. So she comes to me and she says, "Hey, what do you think about us traveling in an RV?" And without even thinking, perhaps even flippantly, I was like, I kind of said, "Sure, whatever. I could rent that.
Yeah,
I could figure that out for a week, maybe 2, maybe 3." And she's just sort of shaking her head, going, "No, that's not what I'm talking about, really. I'm talking about doing life on the road. I've been reading about this. There's like these sub-communities of people that take their families and they do homeschooling on the road and they do, just all kinds of stuff." And I'm embarrassed to say today that my first reaction was not very kind and certainly not very receiving.
Yeah.
Because I thought, man, we got everything around us. We have a comfortable life. We have a big house. We got we have plenty of margin in our life.
Yep.
Why would we give that up today?
Why would you trade comfort for discomfort?
Yeah. And I don't even know. I've never owned a pickup truck. I don't have no idea how to pull a camper. Just all the things of what I didn't know how to do just popped out. And not to mention the fact I'd be unemployed for a year and draining a bunch of savings.
Yeah, that's the part that scares me the most, by the way.
I thought, this is the craziest idea I've ever heard of. So fast forward a little bit, I said to her, and not in all sincerity, I said, "Well, you know what? You've brought this idea to me. Let me pray about it." And thinking in the back of my head of, man, this thing's going to be dead by Thanksgiving, hopefully.
This is the Christian smokescreen. You are not supposed to use that, by the way.
Christian smokescreen, right? Is all right. I'll worry about it. And so I took it back. I started thinking about it some more. And then I had the bright idea to meet up with our financial advisor and said, all right, I'm not going to be the bad guy here. He is. Now, we go into this meeting, and I had a suspicion of what might happen, but I should have done, as we talked about at dinner, I probably needed to pre-wire that discussion a little better.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting across from Dan, and he's going through all of our charts and graphs, and effectively says, "Yeah, well, your retirement balances are going to be less. However,
You're like, sorry, babe. Sorry.
however, you guys could actually pull this off." I thought, doggone it, and he knew our situation at the time. I had a pre-K kid and a kid in middle school, so
Yeah.
he's like, "Ash, you're going to be working for another 18 years probably. I think you can make it up
You'll
on the
catch
back
back
end."
up.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, "All right, did she put you up to this?"
She got to him.
Did you get to him?
Dan, how much? How much was it? How much did it cost? Yeah.
And just anyway, so then after that, and this is where the wrestling happened for me, it was less about the money. I mean, of course, the money was, you had to factor that in. We had to make all that work, but we had just lived below our means for so many years that financially we could actually pull it off. The thing that got me tripped up was what took me the next 2 years, and that was I had wrapped up my professional work into my identity, and they were so tightly intertwined that I couldn't pull them apart. I couldn't make the separation of, I can't even think about leaving the marketplace because I'm an executive at a big Fortune 250 company, and I just have, I'm a senior vice president and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's crazy things. And insecurity started creeping in about, I can't give that up. Who's going to hire me? I'm going to be forgotten. I'm not going to be relevant. I'm not going to just...
And who will I be?
Yeah,
right?
and
Like,
what will I do?
That's part of who I am.
What will I actually do?
You're just gonna be an RV driver.
Yeah, and just the thought of that felt grossly irresponsible to me. How do you give up something like this? So
How did you deal with it?
I wrestled with it for a couple of years, and I had 2 clients who were incredibly helpful and very instrumental in sort of speaking into my life and reminding me that you have a unique opportunity to practice servant leadership at home, through an experience like this. You have a unique opportunity to also continue your relationships with your professional network, albeit in a very different way. No one's going to forget about you, and you're not going to be irrelevant when you come back. As a matter of fact, I had one client who told me this, and I'll forever be grateful to this client, is they said, people are going to remember a different side of you that they would have never gotten to have seen had you continued down your corporate road. And you would have had a great career, and I believe that. You would have had a very fine career, and you would have served your clients well till your retiring day, but they just wouldn't get to see not only that change in
humanizes
you,
you,
but
right?
it really gives a personal side to you
Yeah.
that they just wouldn't get a glimpse of. And
They already knew that one thing about you, which is that you're a big shot C-suite guy, and then they got to see you as a dad.
they got to see
a
me as a
husband,
fumbling
a world
F-350
traveler.
driver,
Yeah.
right?
But also
Right.
someone that can put the more important things in front of work, right? They can see you in a whole different light, I'd imagine.
It was an illuminating experience because it taught me a lot about where I had placed priorities, and where I had put my own worth and my own value, and it was a dangerous place to be, really. And I don't say that in a pious way or anything like that, but I think a lot of us struggle with that idea of being in the marketplace and being so invested in the marketplace, so the thought of stepping away just creates a level of tension and angst that most people would find so uncomfortable that they'd be like, it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
And it was funny because the conversation I had after we decided we were going to go on this trip, I had 3 reactions from people when we told them we were going to do it.
Okay.
The first reaction was, "Oh, that's great. We are so glad you're doing it. Hey, you go. I could never do that."
Yeah.
Second reaction was, I had an opportunity to do something like that earlier in my career, and I didn't take it, and it's become a life regret of mine.
That's powerful.
And the third reaction was, I had an opportunity to take an opportunity like that, perhaps albeit not as complicated or logistically robust as we did, and I took it, and it was a life changer for me. And I told Beth, my wife, I said, if we do this trip right, which I believe we will be in that last camp. And I'm delighted to report we're in that last camp.
You're in the last camp.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. I was thinking, two things I was thinking as you were speaking. One, both of my so my father-in-law and my biological father are retiring this year.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to struggle with that big time.
Yeah.
They're my father-in-law was this big shot in the heavy machinery industry, and my dad's a pharmacist, and it's like now you're not going to be that thing anymore, right? So now you have to figure out what you are going to be.
That's right.
And be able to let go of that other part of you. I think people really struggle with that.
They do, and it's funny because if you don't think about it a few years ahead of when it is time, in fact, for you to retire, your retirement years are pretty bumpy because you've just gone cold turkey from working all the time to, oh my goodness, I'm staring at my belly button now.
Yeah.
And not
I'm
doing
a
anything,
pancake flipper.
Right.
I iron clothes. Yeah, I build a above ground gardening box for my wife now. Do you have time for a quick funny story about
Absolutely.
a word that you just said?
Go.
You're supposed to be the star of the show.
No,
I'm like
go,
David
man.
Letterman. I'm
Come
interviewing
on,
you,
come on.
but I have
I
a
wanna
funny
hear it.
story for you. Okay,
Let's hear it.
Servant leadership.
Yeah.
Okay, I left the big banks and I was interviewing the next mortgage company. Found Movement,
Mm-hmm.
fell in love with Movement, but the other owner of Movement, the other founder, his name is Toby Harris.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you ever met him.
No,
You've met Casey.
I met Casey.
Okay, Toby was kind of like the brains behind the operation that did our structure and our process and all of that.
Okay.
So I fly out to Virginia Beach and I sit down with him, and I'm this cocky 30-year-old that had been rising through the ranks of middle management, and he says, "So Josh, what do you do in a day?" And I rattled off all these reports, and I check this and I do that and I email this, and I thought I was like crushing it. And he goes, "Josh, I need you to stop doing all of that, every bit of it." Okay. And he says, "I'm going to tell you about servant leadership." And he says, "From now on, you work for the loan officers. It's your job to clear the path. It's your job to mop the toilets. It's your job to make sure that they can be successful and not be thanked for it. And that's what you're going to do. Don't manage them anymore. Just clear their barriers, clear their hurdles, say yes." Okay. And when I got back and I loved it, I spent my first 6 months just pouring into that, hiring people that didn't need to be managed and practicing servant leadership.
Yes.
Okay. No, this is where the story gets funny. So I was not raised in the church. Okay. So I had never heard that term before. So I'm walking in my neighborhood and I come across some neighbors and I said, "Where are y'all heading?" And they said, "We're heading to small group." And I know that's Bible study that's been rebranded and it's now small group. Okay, so I know what small group is.
Right.
And I said, "That's really cool. What are y'all studying today in small group?" And they said, "Servant leadership." And I said, "Are you serious?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "You're studying Toby Harris?" And they said, "Who's Toby Harris?" I said, He's the founder of Movement, and he invented servant leadership. How are you studying servant leadership but you don't know Toby Harris? And they said, "Josh, he did not invent servant leadership." I said, "Who did?" And they stopped for a second and they said, "Jesus." I'd never heard the term before. So I had no reason but to believe that this was Toby's thing. Toby's thing was servant leadership. Okay, on to the second part of another fascinating thing that you said, and I'm going to fumble it. So you talked about finding the crosshairs of the pie between. Go ahead and just take over for me so I don't mess it up.
Yeah. So really getting that intersection of what are you passionate about, what are you genetically encoded for, really, what can you be best in the world at, and then what fuels your economic engine. Now, that's not mine, nor is it Toby Harris's. It's Jim Collins. When he wrote that book, Good to Great, 20-something years ago, 22 years ago, he talks about this for corporations. Yeah. And he talks about, he asked the question of what's your hedgehog? Now think about the hedgehog.
Well, I know, hedgehog, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the hedgehog is just this dowdy creature who knows how to do one thing and only one thing. And whereas and he compares it to the fox. And the fox is clever, he's got his hands in everything. Knows a little bit about lots of things, and he pushes this notion of, okay, what's your hedgehog? So then defined by, what am I passionate about? What can I be best in the world at? Not literally, but kind of what can I be best in my field at?
Yep.
Yeah, what am I genetically encoded for? And then what fuels my economic engine? Where those three
Makes
circles
sense.
intersect, that's the ideal job.
So
That's the ideal role.
it's funny that I asked you this question, because if I would have interviewed you in the office,
Yeah.
and there's two seats like this in our podcasting room,
Yeah.
and there's a book sitting right here, and it's Good to Great. I need to read it again, clearly.
Some of the stuff in there is timeless.
Amazing book.
Concept wise. I mean, it is funny to see now, kind of the companies that were profiled in there, and kind of, and there's been some companies that have gone away, obviously, but generally speaking, I'm a big believer in the approach, and there's different variations of those three circles. I've seen some that are 4 circles. I've seen the Ikigai model that comes out of Japan. I mean, it's a lot of the same concept, but basically getting to a place where, when I got into the workforce, we made the mistake sometimes of going straight to the economic engine and saying, all right, what's going to be the best paying job that I can get? And yeah, I've got some skills to do it, but am I really passionate about it? We kind of backdoored into that.
That's right.
And I think, and this is where I think, and we talked a little bit about millennials and even Gen Z, I think now, I think a lot of these folks, they actually get this model right, because they do in fact focus on, all right, what am I excited about? I want to be a part of something. I want to be something that kind of gets me excited and going in the morning versus
something bigger than them.
Yeah, I don't need to make over $100,000 a year, or maybe I do, but it's not my opening serve,
Well, it's also the gig economy. You were saying that it's so cool that people can have 3 different jobs. And when you have 3 different jobs, you get to figure out the one that you love.
Absolutely right.
And you could focus more on that one, even if maybe it doesn't pay as well as the other 2.
And we've been, it's funny, we've been talking about this in the world of investing for years around diversification. Asset allocation and diversification and the financial terms around that. And we always say, well, you got to have some stocks, and you got to have some bonds, you got to have an international exposure and all that.
Yep.
We never put our eggs all in one particular asset class.
But we do with income.
Number one thing we do is with income.
Yeah.
And we feel beholden to getting a W-2 from somebody, or getting a paycheck from somebody.
It's really good. What is your crossroad? Like, what is the thing that you settled on? And I know you opened a company around the time that you were out traveling.
I did, and it was funny because when we got back from the trip, corporate America was still there, and true to form, my former employer, who has always been very good to me before, during, and even after the trip, they welcomed me back if I wanted it, and I wasn't ready to do it, and I had a lot of opportunity to think on the road, and even upon re-entry, had an opportunity to sit down with a good friend of mine who really pushed me on the idea of, have you thought about executive coaching? Have you thought about leadership development? And again, this is back to, we get so tangled up in acronyms and certifications and all that, and I got all tangled up in, well, those coaches, man, they all have letters next to their names, and they all have certifications and all this, that, and the other. And my friend is kind of shaking his head going, well, kind of walk me through your last 20, 25 years of work and tell me what you did. And I mean, you'll appreciate this, that what did I have? I had coaching conversations. We talked about leadership development. We developed and grew leaders. We grew businesses as a result of that. And he kind of sits back and he said, try this. See if you like it.
Yeah.
And to his credit, I mean, he brought me into a couple of his clients, and I got a taste of it and absolutely loved it. I mean, I will always be, to my dying breath, I'm a business development and I'm a sales guy. So there's always a portion of my business that is involved in BD advisory, and whether it's talking to sales teams, giving sales teams ideas, just sales coaching, if you want to say that. But then the other 2 pieces of what I do around leadership development and around coaching, and just it is meaningful work for me, and it allows me to make a mark and make an impact in a way that I've not been able to do before.
I love it. Are there sectors that you specialize in? So if anyone's listening and they are in leadership in this world,
yeah. It's funny. I don't. And the thing I'll say is that any organization that sees people and leader development as a priority, regardless of what's going on in the economy and regardless of what's going on in the sort of ecosystem around them, and they don't put their, they don't take their foot off the gas when times get tough, they still continue to invest. Those are the people that I want to work with.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Because it says a lot about them, and it says a lot about where they place the value in it. I mean,
Yeah.
this is where I do believe that learning and development organizations sometimes get the short shrift when it comes to recessionary times or less,
Yeah.
less favorable economic
They don't can the
conditions.
marketing department.
Budget gets canned.
Yeah.
Budgets in some of these functional areas just get, and
In our world, there's just such a tremendous gap of the types of leaders that people need, and you see it more in the down markets than in the up markets.
Sure.
But people need leadership in the down markets, and our world is built on leaders that are producing. So they get paid 90% more for their production than for helping their team members.
yes.
They're also in they're in competition with their team members also. So how are you supposed to then get any time from your leader that's wearing all these other hats? So one thing Movement does well is they when you get to a certain point, they make you stop producing. Yeah, so you can
That's
really
good.
focus on your team the right way.
Well, they fall into this idea of the player coach, as a position.
Yeah,
And in a lot of ways, I mean, there are many organizations where you are a player and a coach. Well, when you're a player coach, what do you default to? You default to the things that you know how to do best. And more times than not, for a player coach, that means I'm going to be an individual contributor, and I'm going to make my mark on the player side
Yeah.
more than I am on the coach side. Now, again, unless the incentives are aligned differently, and there's a whole compensation conversation around that, but generally speaking, we tend to gravitate towards the stuff that feels comfortable to us.
That's right.
That we know how to do.
This is neither here nor there, and I hadn't planned this to talk about this in this meeting, but I just took my team through a whole change in how we were structured, and it was because of what we're talking about right now.
Sure.
So I had 4 branch managers.
Mhm.
Okay, I only moved my hand 3 times. Let me do it 1, 2, 3, 4. And then they each had a group of 7 or 8 loan officers under them. Okay, and what I realized when I was looking at the coaches is they were all really, really great. My branch leaders. They were all really, really great at 1 or 2 things, but there are about 8 things that their loan officers needed from them.
Yeah.
Okay, and I had one guy that was great at coaching. I had one guy that was great at accountability. I had one guy that was great at social media, and I had one guy that was really great at building relationships and spending time with his team and pouring into them on the personal side.
Yeah.
And I looked at all the loan officers, and they only got that one thing, and then me. Okay, so I went to all of these guys, and I say guys because they are actually guys, but
Mhm.
I went to them and I said, I'm going to ask you to do something crazy, which is to give up your teams. I want you to give up your teams, and we're going to do this for the loan officers. And instead of each of you having 8 people, you're now all going to share all of the loan officers, and that way you'll share the commission on them, okay? And that way the loan officers get to have all the hats. So they get to have the person that's best at social media, the person that has accountability, the person that's good at coaching, the person that's good at personal relationships, and experience it all, and not just get stuck with one or the other, basically.
Yes.
Now, this is the crazy thing. So I knew the loan officers would appreciate it, and they have. They now, anytime they need something, they have a person that they can go to. What I didn't realize is for the coaches, when I asked them to give up on the thing that they're not good at, it was such a breath of fresh air for them because they could just focus on kind of like what you said, their intersection, right? They could just focus on that thing that they're really, really good at, that makes them money, that helps their team.
And the company gets the best of them
Yeah,
in doing so,
that's right.
right? I mean, that's powerful.
And they give up. There's a little bit of a feeling of failure, knowing that you're not being everything for your team because we've asked you to be everything and you can't be everything. And they walked around with this feeling of failure. And when we said, hey, take away those 6 hats and throw them away and wear these 2 hats, the pride came out.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of cool.
That's really great.
My payroll department had a fit over it. They were not happy. Let's switch gears again, if that's okay. So
Sure.
one of the things I really like to talk about in this setting is nonprofit work
Yeah.
and who you're involved with. And I mentioned earlier, I give a check to your favorite charity, just to say thank you for coming on, and also to help me satisfy my giving goals, basically. And it gets matched by Movement and Casey Crawford. So every any company you could name will get matched. But tell me who do you work with these days?
So my charitable works are primarily with two organizations. The first one is a group that I've been involved with for about 15 years called C3G. They are called Christ-Centered Careers. It's a jobs ministry.
Okay.
So every Monday morning we meet locally here at North Point Community Church in Alpharetta. And
my favorite church.
These are people that are in between jobs. They're unemployed. They're underemployed. They could be fully employed, but they're just feeling a bit of restlessness or discontent where they are, and they're looking to make a change. So it's interesting. We're talking about where I met Laura Cavett.
Yeah.
Was in the employment industry. And
Randstad.
While I started my career with Randstad and got my first taste of that business for the first 10 years of my career, I ended up leaving that industry, but I fell in love with the business side of just the purpose side of helping people find work. So that what was formerly a vocation for me became an avocation for me, and I was able to give that back by way of volunteering now.
I love
through
that.
employment. And so I in any country in the world, but I'll localize this to the U.S., that there's just something special about employment. It really makes the world go round, whether you have your own business, whether you work for somebody, whether you work part-time, full-time, first time, minimum wage, whatever. There's just something that is freeing and liberating and, soul nourishing about work.
Absolutely.
Gives people purpose, gives people the ability to pay their bills, raise families.
You said yourself you were lost without it.
Yeah, buy homes, whatever. I mean,
yeah.
Whatever that is, and work plays such an integral part of that. So to the extent that I'm able to give back in that regard, that's a ministry I will be involved in for a long time.
You said something interesting, by the way, just now, that you meet Monday morning. That might be my least favorite time to have a nonprofit meeting in the entire world.
Well, and I'll give you maybe a contrarian point of view on that. Is I tell people that I have a get-to job, not a go-to job, where I get to do certain things. I don't have to just go to a job. I get to do these things. So when I start my Monday mornings that way, it's the way I start my week, by actually giving back. And I'm not saying that at all to pat on the back or anything.
No, I love
like
it.
That,
I love what you're saying.
Therapeutically, for me, I wouldn't want to start my week any other way. I sometimes I have to travel for work on those Mondays and I can't do it, but generally speaking, if I can do it, this is a group of people that I have tremendous respect for, and we honestly have no idea who's going to walk in the door that day either. So the work has meaning, and I'm blessed to be in a group full of incredible volunteers and incredible job seekers too.
Powerful. That's really cool. I know the church very, very well because of all my time spent with MedShare, and the Be Rich campaign was and has always been just massive for us. Like such a huge part of our budget and a huge part of the budget for many, many, many NGOs in town. So that's really cool.
Well, and I'll tell you, what's fascinating about it for me is we started out. We weren't always at North Point, actually. Just over the last probably 10 years, we've been at North Point. But prior to that, we were meeting at an Atlanta Bread Company in Alpharetta, where we had just a few people coming to the meetings. Pretty soon, we were taking over the entire restaurant. And it looked like we were causing a fire hazard over there, so we had to switch.
You grew out of Panera.
And we grew out of a pretty large casual dining restaurant into North Point, and at its peak in the late 2000s, we had probably 400 people that would come on a Monday morning.
No.
And think about when this was. This was when the financial crisis was. This was when unemployment was high. And so now it's sort of leveled off to around 50 or 60 people a week, and it's, whether we have 5 people that show up or whether we have 500 people that show up, we know that somebody will be nourished that day, and
I
hopefully
love it.
walk out with an idea. So
I don't know if you've heard it phrased this way, but I always say that I give back and I volunteer because I'm selfish. Because it feels so good.
yeah,
Yeah, it feels
that's right.
really good, right?
No, that's
I mean,
right.
If I'm not one of those that gives to the point of it hurting,
Yeah.
I give to the point of it feeling good. So it's a very, very selfish thing.
Listen, I think it's a dopamine hit that I think once you kind of get into the rhythm of that, it's better than any kind of other
Yeah.
rush that you could get.
Yeah, it's way better than spending and buying. I'll tell you that.
Right.
And for you on Monday mornings, when most people are spending an hour on the news and an hour on Facebook, you started your week off right. What's the second organization?
The second organization is a school where my younger son goes, Valor Christian Academy in Alpharetta. I serve on the board at Valor, and just love the mission of the school and the heartbeat of the school. We're training up that next level of servant leaders. I mean, that's really, it's in our
Yeah,
motto and mantra.
They're all studying
and,
Toby Harris.
Yeah, back to Toby Harris. See? Who knew? He's got such reach.
I don't know if Toby's ever heard this story, by the way.
Now, I've heard some of your episodes where you have different guests that volunteer in different places. I mean, at the end of the day, the phrase that I give people is, whether it's in a nonprofit setting or if you're a senior leader at an organization, we have a responsibility to be in the ministry of availability. Nothing else. That when you hit a certain point in your career and you are able to give back, whether it's in a charitable setting or whether it's even in your work setting, this idea of being available to people